So this deck of slides is really part of the first one. I had to split it because it was too big a file to sit on Moodle for some reason. So let's continue our discussion of the benefits of marriage and the problems, excuse me, when marriage is in decline. The Heritage Foundation, it's a fairly conservative think tank. They did a very respectable study recently and found that marriage is on the decline for poor Americans. Out-of-wedlock births are strongly correlated to poverty. And you can see here that married two-parent families have less than a 7% chance of producing children that live in poverty, whereas a single-parent female head of household has a near 40% chance of producing children that will live in poverty. Out-of-wedlock births are, as everybody knows, on the rise. In the articles posted for this topic, teen pregnancy, while on the decline in America, is still one of the highest in the developed world. Teens in the Deep South, like Mississippi, for example, are 15 times more likely to get pregnant than teens in Switzerland. And teens in Switzerland have more frequent sex than American teens. Teens in Scandinavian countries have a 6% pregnancy rate, which is extremely low. Mississippi teens are 15 times higher than these rates. A teen who gets pregnant in the US has an 80% chance of entering poverty, and once there, has a very difficult chance of escaping it. Even male teens who father children as teenagers are far more likely to enter or stay in poverty. We've already mentioned in the class that poverty is the invention of cultures. We spent 195,000 years as hunter-gatherers, and there was no poverty, in part because of the way humans organized themselves during this period. But humans were bigger than they are today. Their brain capacity was larger. They had whiter, straighter teeth. They didn't need their wisdom teeth pulled. They didn't have flat feet at anywhere near the rate that we do today. Very few of them were nearsighted, as many today are nearsighted. So clearly, all the benefits of settlement and eventual benefits of technology are obvious, but there are costs, and one of them is poverty. Poverty correlates to low levels of education, poor economic prospects, and higher rates of birth out of wedlock. And you can see in this chart that the more educated a woman is, the less likely she is to give birth outside of marriage. If she's a high school dropout, there's a huge likelihood that she's going to produce a child outside of marriage. If she has a college degree, that's only 8%. Now, the Brookings Institute is another think tank, and they recently published Pathways to the Middle Class. They asked a simple question: what are the criteria for an average American to enter the middle class by the age of 40? And by that they meant an average of $68,000 per year. That's the minimum threshold for entering the middle class. You make less than that and you're in the lower middle class or among the poor. And they found that there were three criteria. The first of which, surprisingly, is to simply get a high school diploma, not a GED. Having a college degree is very important, but that is more alleviation from unemployment. During the last recession, which is just ending, we hit as high as 11% unemployment, higher in some states. But only 3.5% at the worst of the recession were college grads. So getting a college degree is insulation against unemployment. But in any case, the Brookings Institute said that the first criteria is simply getting a high school diploma. The second is to work full-time from high school on. In other words, minimum 40 hours a week. You lose your job, you get 2 part-time jobs. And people who did this highly correlated to entering the middle class. And third, wait until marriage before having children. So Americans that waited until marriage to have children, got only a high school diploma, and worked full-time, had a huge percentage, huge chance of entering the middle class. For Americans that did none of these things, they dropped out of high school, they didn't work full-time, and they got kids out of before marriage, 2% shot of ever entering the middle class or entering it by age 40. So this is a significant study that shows the value of waiting until marriage before having kids. Now, this is a bell curve. That means that there are people who broke all these rules and still enter the middle class. And it also means these are called outliers. And on the other end of the bell curve, it means that there are people who followed all these rules and did not enter the middle class by 40. But the bell curve means that the vast majority of people sit within this bell, following these basic criteria. It's highly probable that they'll enter the middle class. Now, marriage across time. Since the close of the Ice Age, cultures and families have worried about their daughters for obvious reasons. We no longer live in a world where the entire hunter-gatherer tribe participates in the familiar tasks of food procurement, security against predators, and the care of children. Nor, for most of human history, has there been any social or economic infrastructure, formal social infrastructure, to care for children born out of wedlock. In other words, there's no social services, no welfare. And young single women in patriarchal societies with children might find themselves ostracized and living under a bridge. For most of human history, post-Ice Age, women passed from the ownership of their fathers to the ownership of their husbands in arranged marriages. Virgin brides were socially and financially valuable as a virtual commodity traded between families for family alliances and other reasons. Pregnant single women brought shame and hardship in patriarchal societies to families. The hardship was if the family decided to keep the daughter, they had to feed more mouths. They had to fund an unmarketable mother in her child. And it didn't seem to matter in these societies how the girl got pregnant, whether by incest, rape, or basic sexual curiosity. Some families put her out of the house. In some societies, even today, honor killing exists. You should do a Google search on what that is if you don't already know. But societies where girls deviate from the norm, even holding hands with a boy, but certainly being sexually active, she could be killed in that society. And there are thousands of girls a year who are killed, executed by their own families because of shame. Now, it is in this context that a conservative sexual ethic emerged that attempted to preserve a young woman's virginity until marriage. But this was done by sequestering her, keeping her out of the public eye, particularly the gaze of men, by arranging her marriage, and once married, by further sequestering her, keeping her inside the house, limiting her access to the public sphere. So in conclusion, marriage has many benefits today to individuals and to society. And children born out of wedlock are extremely vulnerable. Now remember, this is a bell curve. Some children born out of wedlock end up doing very well. We live in a post-patriarchal society. This is the first time in 8,000 years where a culture, i.e. Europe and America, have attempted to divest themselves of their patriarchal interests. And we have a formal social infrastructure that prevents children from living under a bridge. And yet the cost remains for millions of children who, despite the infrastructure, grow up in poverty and disadvantage. Remember, a TANF check, a housing voucher, food stamps, the WIC program, all of that combined, one is still well below the poverty line. Marriage, therefore, must be a pretty good thing.